My name is Stephen Frampton. I'm a predictive astrologer, and today I'm releasing my prediction for the US presidential election 2016. I have a very strong interest in current affairs, and I also have strong political opinions, but I am not letting those opinions influence my analysis of the election. It's been a very interesting election season with many ups and downs, many surprises, and it's complicated. The astrology of this election is extremely complex as well. Astrology is complex because it's a system, an observance of nature that enables us to understand what's occurring on Earth, anything and everything that's occurring on Earth, in a person's life, in a nation, in this election. I do a lot of predictive work relating to world events, politics, the economy, when nations might get into conflict, etc. And I find this all very, very interesting. Not many people know much about astrology, and astrology generally doesn't have a very good name. But I promise you that if you explore good astrology, you can only come to the conclusion that it's extremely valid. In effect, what we're doing is we're observing the movement of planets in our solar system. Those movements are very, very predictable. This is astronomy. And we can look back in time and consider what occurred when there were different astrological alignments. This enables us to take that understanding and project it out into the future to determine what would be most likely to occur and when things will occur. I have analysed the election from many different angles and perspectives. I've looked at Hillary Clinton, I've looked at Donald Trump, I've analysed charts for members of their families, I've looked at the United States charts, I've even looked at charts for WikiLeaks and Julian Assange. And I've taken all of this information to make my prediction. You might notice that not many astrologers have gone public on their prediction for this election. It's quite risky as an astrologer to be public about such a big event that everybody is interested in. I hope that I'm right. I think that I'm right. I know that my analysis is very rigorous and that I've taken a very methodical, analytical approach, and the full analysis, or my explanation of this analysis, is going to be available on my website in a couple of days. I do speak about the specifics of it astrologically, but I also explain in practical terms what the analyses actually mean for the candidates and for the United States. So whether you are interested in astrology, an astrologer looking for another person's perspective, or somebody that just wants to know about the election, you'll find an enormous amount of information, and you'll see that I've taken a very, very rigorous approach to this study. And so I am releasing this prediction today, and I encourage you to visit my website in a couple of days to hear my full analysis. I've received a lot of inquiries from different people and some organizations asking about my prediction for the US election, and specifically the prediction that Donald Trump would defeat Hillary Clinton. And some of those inquiries are people just interested in insight. Others are from people that are interested in prediction and technically how I made this prediction. And so I'm going to talk you through some of my analysis. If you're not conversant with astrology, don't worry about it. I will do my best to make this clear for people that are interested in astrology and for people that are not, but that are interested in the science of prediction. Let me say a few things first of all. I don't intend in this presentation to explain to people why good astrology is so valid, so comprehensive, and so precise when done correctly. I have produced other materials helping people to see that good metaphysics is very real. But I'd like to say a couple of things on that subject just briefly before we get into this election and my prediction about Donald Trump. Please remember that there's good astrology and there's astrology that's not so useful. The vast majority of people have no understanding of astrology, or such a limited understanding of astrology that it's misleading for them. Astrology is exceptionally complex, and it just is what it is. There are many different schools of thought in astrology as well, and some of them are inaccurate, some of them are misleading. It's also my understanding that much has been done over the years to deliberately discredit astrology. And I'd like to make a couple of comments about that, just briefly. Astrology is the interpretation of what astronomical movements mean and how they manifest themselves here on the Earth plane. Now, the movement of the planets in our solar system is absolutely predictable. They don't just float around randomly. Their movements, their cycles are set. And that's why we're able to look at any point in time in the past or the future at where the planets will be positioned, what condition they will be in, how they will relate with each other, etc. And if anybody wants to understand what those movements mean, astrology, what they have to do is study. Good astrology, excellent metaphysics, world-class metaphysics, is an extremely academic and labor-intensive study, research, and it's not for the faint-hearted. You know, if you love good in-depth analysis, if you like computer programming, if you like languages, if you like music, you know, writing and reading music, if you like advanced maths, then you might also very much appreciate the language of astrology. And as I said, it just is. You can't deny it. If you study historically the positioning quality of the planets in our solar system, and you correlate those things with events on Earth, you will see a very clear language that reveals itself to you. And that enables you to look into the future. It's my belief, my understanding to date, that everything is predictable. Everything. I want to make a couple of comments very briefly, as I said, about why I feel astrology is being discredited. Astrology is exceptionally powerful, exceptionally useful. If you wanted to control a population, you would need to have more knowledge than they have. And you would need to ensure that the knowledge you have is not shared. You might discredit it to keep it to yourself. Because as we say, knowledge is power. Now, those things said, let's take a look at the election. That's what we're here for. Here is a chart for Donald Trump. In the center of the chart, you see a little X. That's the Earth. Imagine that that's the point on Earth when Donald Trump was born, June 14th, 1946, 10:54 a.m. in Jamaica, New York. And around the Earth, within the range of the zodiacal belt, you see the planets in our solar system. And it shows you where those planets were positioned that very moment he was born, when he drew his first breath. It is undeniable to anybody that properly explores astrology that there is absolutely a correlation between the natal chart and the entity being birthed. And it applies equally to corporations, to nations, you name it. I do a lot of consulting now for organizations that want insight into current affairs, into different markets, whether a nation would be stable enough to trade in, etc., etc. I do a lot of insight relating to crimes and even psychiatry. And so here is Donald Trump's natal chart. It describes him. Now, this is a chart that is not showing you at this stage the transiting planets at the time of the election. This chart shows you the progressed planets. And this is a technique that we use to understand the deep underlying conditions within the entity, the person. And so if you look at the little green planets around the wheel, they are the progressed planets. And we use a particular mathematical approach to reposition the planets. And by combining the planets, comparing and contrasting them, the progressed planets, with each other, and with the natal planets in the natal chart, we understand the deep underlying conditions within that person or within the entity. And then we add to that many different other sort of lenses of analysis in order to decipher what is occurring. So I'm going to share a number of things about Donald Trump's chart that enabled me to see that he would win the election. I will also share some insights about Hillary Clinton's chart that enabled me to see that she would not win the election. And I'll do an extended version of this presentation for people that are really interested in the great detail and intricacy of the astrology of all of this. So this is going to be a shorter version, and I'll keep this to about 1 hour. I actually spent at least 30 hours studying the election, and I used different forms of astrology. Now, let's get started looking at Donald Trump. Let me say, when a client calls me and says, I'm going to be in a lawsuit with such and such a person or such and such an organization, what can you advise me? My advice is always, make sure you know what you're dealing with, because you don't want to get into a fight with somebody that is stronger or more advantaged than you are. You're likely to lose. And this was certainly the case when we compare Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. Now, I have a very strong interest in current affairs, and that includes the US and other nations. I'm British, as you can tell from my accent. I've lived in different places in Europe, but I now live in the United States. I am not going to profile the depths of Donald Trump's psyche or soul. That's not my intention here. My intention is just to help people see how I came to the conclusion that he would win the election. If you look at the left of the chart where it says AC, that's called the ascendant. The ascendant is an extremely important point or line in a chart because it describes the person as compared to other areas of their life, other people in their life. We're very interested in the ascendant. Donald Trump has Mars on his ascendant. This is why he is an extremely determined individual. Mars is the planet of determination, action, getting things done. It's also the planet of construction, which rules his fourth house at the bottom of the chart, labeled IC. The fourth house is the house of land, real estate, family. I don't think there's any doubt about the fact that he's very passionate about his family and he's very passionate about real estate. His Mars is under his rising sign of Leo. Leo is a fixed sign. Fixed signs are determined, dogged, they don't give up. And this can be an asset, this can be a liability, like everything. Now, one thing that's very important about Donald Trump's chart is that there is a fixed star called Regulus, and it's in the very late degrees of Leo, as is Donald Trump's ascendant. Regulus is called the heart of the lion. If you have Regulus on your ascendant, in other words, if you have your ascendant in the late degrees of Leo, you have the great support and favor of Regulus. And this is something that Donald Trump has. It makes him somebody that's very difficult to defeat. And it makes him in many ways very fortunate. The sun in anybody's chart is symbolic of their status. If you look at the top of the chart and you see the sun there, it's a circle with a smaller circle in the middle, which is symbolic of spirit descending to the earth plane. His sun is at 22 degrees of Gemini, or it was when he was born. When we progress a chart, we make minor adjustments, creeping adjustments to the natal planets. And in his life, the sun has progressed from up there, high up in the chart, very public, at 22 degrees of Gemini, right down to his ascendant. That is very, very favorable indeed, especially when the sun rules you. So his ascendant is in Leo. He's ruled by Leo. The sun rules Leo. His ruler has progressed down to his ascendant, and it'll be there for quite some time. That is extremely favourable, especially when you have the fixed star Regulus on your side as well. Also, take a look at the lower left-hand quadrant of the chart. You see in there the sign in yellow, which is Libra. Donald Trump's natal Jupiter, looks like a little 4 there, is at 17 degrees of Libra. Now, Libra is the planet of good fortune, good luck, abundance, expansion. I'll say that many astrologers generalize about the planets. You have to look at the planet in the context of the natal chart. Because, yes, Jupiter's the planet of abundance, we call it the major benefic, but you have to look at the quality or condition of the planet in the chart. A person with a very corrupted Jupiter, a Jupiter that's not much use, can not be fortunate through Jupiter. Well, it's not necessarily fortunate through Jupiter. But note that his natal Jupiter is at 17 degrees of Libra. And if you look on the outside of the wheel, you can see the little symbol for Venus. It's the symbol for women as well, actually, as Mars is symbolic of men and the phallus. His Venus has progressed down in his chart, and at this time in his life sits right there at Jupiter. This is, astrologically, this in itself is exquisite. Venus rules the beginning of Donald Trump's 10th house of career status, reputation, at the top of his chart, 24 degrees of Taurus. Taurus is ruled by Venus. His midheaven that rules his path in the world is ruled, therefore, by Venus. His Venus has progressed into its other sign of Libra, and a planet loves being in its own sign. You get a very happy planet. It can do what it really wants to do. It's very effective under its own sign. His Venus, ruler of his career, at the top of his chart, his midheaven, has progressed to Jupiter. That's a very unusual progression. It's exceptionally favourable. And it was one of the strong indicators to me that Trump would win the presidency. Also, if you look at the green on the outside of the wheel, look again at down the left-hand side at the bottom, you'll see AC. That's symbolic for ascendant. We progressed the ascendant as well. His ascendant had progressed down there to 21 degrees of Libra. So he personally, the ascendant, is there at 21 degrees of Libra. And what do we have? His progressed Jupiter, planet of good fortune, is right there at his progressed ascendant. Another highly favourable sign. Now, Trump's natal Jupiter is very close to the degree of exaltation for Saturn. Each planet has a different way of functioning depending on where it is in the zodiac. It'll behave differently depending on the sign it's under and even at the degree it's under. Saturn, the planet of duty, of damned hard work, is exalted at 20 degrees of Libra. In other words, the 20 degrees of Libra is the finest point in the zodiac, arguably, for Saturn. And Donald Trump's Jupiter is there. Now, his natal Saturn is at 23 degrees of Cancer. And Saturn hates being in the sign of Cancer. Saturn does not like that environment. His descendant, other people, and in this case his competitor, Hillary Clinton, is symbolized by his descendant, His descendant is in Aquarius. Aquarius is ruled by Saturn. The symbol of Hillary Clinton in Donald Trump's chart is Saturn in Cancer. Saturn is highly debilitated in Cancer. And if you look at the moon in green there up on the left of the chart, you'll see that his progressed moon is at that point as well. And some astrologers may have felt that that was bad for Trump because they would say, okay, so the moon is symbolic of women. And the fact that his progressed moon is under her own sign now of Cancer empowers women, and they are on top of his very unfortunate Saturn. But his Saturn is not as unfortunate as that if you know what you're looking at astrologically. The moon is not just symbolic of women in mundane astrology, the study of world events, etc. The moon is symbolic of the public generally. And Donald Trump's Saturn in Cancer is actually in good shape because it has a relationship with his beautiful Jupiter. They have a relationship with each other. We call it mutual reception. They're very supportive of each other. So his Saturn's not as bad as that. But my interpretation was that his progressed moon, the public, Saturn, which in its basic form in Cancer is disadvantaged, pointed to the fact that they would not choose Clinton. I looked at many, many other things. And if I were to talk you through everything I looked at, we'd be here for literally about 30 hours. There's something called the part of fortune in a chart. If you look over to the right of the chart, of the descendant, where it says DC, you'll see a little symbol. It's a circle with a sort of cross in it. That's the part of fortune. Donald Trump's part of fortune sits in the most powerful position just before his descendant. It makes him very fortunate when he's dealing with other people. And his part of fortune is in Aquarius, so it's also ruled by Saturn, which makes him difficult to defeat. He's a force to be reckoned with. If you look at the green on the outside of the chart, you'll see that in his first house of self, look at the AC, that's him. The sun is there, progressed there, incredibly powerful. His part of fortune has progressed into his first house of self. It was another indicator that Trump would win the election. Now, the planet Mercury's favorite position in the whole zodiac is 15 degrees of Virgo. And Donald Trump's part of fortune has progressed into, 17 degrees of Virgo, it seems. So his part of fortune is right on top of the most fortunate point in Virgo for the planet Mercury, which was a strong indicator to me as well, because Mercury rules his sun in Gemini, his north node next to it in Gemini, his Uranus in Gemini. And I very much observed the positioning of his progressed part of fortune at the degree of exaltation for Virgo. Remember that, for Mercury in Virgo, remember that Mercury's decisions, right? Your vote is a mercurial act. It's a communication, a message, a choice. Another indicator in his natal chart alone is that in the top of his chart, in the 10th house of the public domain, his career, he's got Uranus at his north node conjunct the sun. That's an extremely strong indication that there would be a sudden and highly unusual shift in his status and in his career. And it was triggered yesterday. One of the reasons Donald Trump had issues with his reputation towards women, the things that he said about women, is because his natal moon at 21 degrees of Sagittarius is at his south node. The south node is malefic. It's a very difficult point in any chart. And so yes, Donald Trump did not necessarily communicate favorably with women or towards women and had problems with regard to the things he said about women. That's his moon at the south node. doesn't like being at the south node. So that was problematic for him. And there are many other things about his natal chart and his progressions that indicated to me that he would win the election, all right? One of them was his progressed moon, the public, approaching his Venus, ruler of his career, Venus being a highly fortunate planet. And Venus rules his Jupiter, by the way, as well as his career. That was another indication to me. And there were, as I said, other factors like when you progress his Jupiter there in Libra, you find that now in his life it forms at what we call a trine, 4 degrees away, a very, very harmonious relationship with his natal sun, his ascendant, his ruler, right, the presidency, another indication that he would win. I'll show you now some factors that I considered with regard to Hillary Clinton. So let's look at her natal chart with her progressions. We don't know for sure what time Hillary Clinton was born. We do with Trump. And the time of birth is extremely important. It limits the insight to a certain degree. I mean, if you know what you're doing, you can still pretty much decipher the chart, but it sort of makes the job more difficult. There are different theories. That one is that she was born around 8 a.m. The other is that no, she was born around 8 p.m. There's a theory that she was born at 2:18 a.m. And there is actually some good evidence behind that theory because it relates to what a couple of her family members have said in the past. And there's a rumor that she said that she has Leo rising, that she'd said that to somebody a while back. Now, if you look at the top of the chart, you'll see a P. And it's in between two other planets. The P is Pluto. Pluto is positioned there at 14 degrees of Leo when she was born. On one side, to the left, she's got Saturn, the major malefic, problematic planet, in very bad condition in Hillary Clinton's chart. On the other side, she has Mars, the minor malefic. Mars works for Saturn. Mars is a problematic planet as well. This means that when she was born, Pluto was besieged. This is a term we use in astrology. A planet can be besieged. Whichever way her Pluto turns, it hits a malefic planet. It's besieged, it's locked up. And it was a very strong indication in her natal chart alone that there would be a huge fall from grace or, a great loss of power. It was not a good sign for her in the run-up to the election day. Now, there are many, many other things I could say about Hillary Clinton's chart. I'm not going to decipher her psyche, right? But I'll tell you a few things that will be of interest. Mercury, the planet of words, truth versus lies, is at 21 degrees of Scorpio in Clinton's chart. And that is right next to her south node of the moon. That is a big problem. And it was a very strong indication that one of the challenges she would have in the election is that she would be accused of not telling the truth. It stood out very clearly in her chart. And her natal Mercury, her words, her mind, her left brain, in effect, forms a very adverse aspect to that cluster of malevolent planets, Saturn, Pluto, Leo, Saturn, Pluto, and Mars in Leo, Saturn and Mars besieging Leo. Not a good sign for Clinton. Now, remembering that the sun is your status, and the sun is symbolic of the presidency, if you look down in her chart, if you look down in the bottom left-hand quadrant, the green, that's the symbol for Capricorn. Capricorn's the sign of government, big business, big banks. And that's the sign of my beautiful chocolate Labrador Jimbo having a shake. So her sun in green, if you look at the green sun, that's her progressed sun. So we've progressed her chart. We find her sun there in Capricorn, but it puts her sun at 3 signs from Neptune up there in Libra. That's a 90-degree angle. That's bad. That's huge disappointment or disillusionment. That was not a good sign for her with the presidency. Her progressed sun in Capricorn forms an adverse aspect, a very adverse aspect to her moon up there in Libra as well, which was an indication that the people would not choose Hillary Clinton. They would vote for Trump. And her sun also forms other aspects to her natal Mars, problematic, her natal Pluto, problematic. Okay, and her sun has progressed at this time in her life to Mercury. That's a problem, because her natal Mercury is a problematic planet, and wherever Mercury progresses in her chart, it carries the energy and symbolism of the natal Mercury, which is that she would be accused of not telling the truth, or that she wouldn't tell the truth. Still up for debate. There are many other indicators in her chart that she would not win the election. Let's look at transiting planets. So let me explain this. The progressed planets describe the deep underlying conditions, like the powder keg of dynamite that can make something occur. The transiting planets ignite. They ignite the powder keg. And so we've considered some of the underlying dynamics for Trump and some of the underlying dynamics for Clinton. And now we're going to look at the transiting planets and what they would ignite. This is Trump's chart. Now the planets in green on the outside of the wheel are transiting planets. Up in the sky, where are they positioned? Where are they within their orbit around the sun at this time? Planet of good fortune, abundance. Jupiter, planet with which Donald Trump has a very good relationship. Jupiter is there in the middle of Libra, you see. It is now. The day after the election, it was yesterday. That's very fortunate. And because his progressed Venus, rule of his career, was there, or is there, very, very strong sign that he would win. And I have to tell you, I put my neck on the line, putting my prediction out there. Obviously, when your profession, the way you make your living, and your pride is associated with prediction, getting it wrong is not a good thing. All the polls, or nearly all the polls, are saying that Clinton would win. I've received so many nasty messages from individuals of many different walks in life, even other astrologers, telling me that I was insane, that I'm a bad astrologer because I predicted Trump. And I discussed it with my best friend, Misty. And I said, Misty, I'm sure I'm right. I know what I'm looking at. And you do have to make a judgment. You have to take many, many different variables. Far more than I could talk you through in this presentation. You've got to look at each of them, and then you can put them together in this huge, complex jigsaw puzzle and then make a judgment. But I said, Misty, I am sure that Trump is going to win. Clinton's going to be defeated. But nearly every other astrologer is saying that it's Clinton, that Clinton's going to win. And the polls say that Clinton's going to win. And logic suggested that she probably would. But the planets don't lie. They tell the truth. And they made me very confident that she would win. And I said, Misty, I'm going to put it out there. And if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But I have a very strong, methodical, rigorous analysis revealing why I came to the conclusion I came to. Let's look at a few other things. Another indicator for me was this. If you look at the moon in his natal chart, down there at the bottom of the chart in black, the little moon symbol, it says 21. It's because it's at 21 degrees of Sagittarius. That's his natal moon, right? His natal moon is at the south node Bad place. The little guy in green down below is Saturn. Saturn is problematic, the opposite of Jupiter. Saturn is transiting up to his moon south node conjunction. Now, some people may have concluded that's very bad for Trump. He won't win. But my conclusion was his descendant, the House of Other People, and his competitor, his rivalry Clinton, is in Aquarius. So the planet Saturn is symbolic of his competitor. Shows me that his competitor is going to be very, very disappointed. Now, it is also problematic for Trump. Saturn is not there yet. But I am concerned for Trump because the moon is your body. The moon creates your body. Think of the moon and the menstrual cycle. The moon creates shifts in emotions, in hormones. It's associated with the body. If you speak to a good surgeon, they'll tell you that the full moon, has an effect upon surgery because the full moon makes it harder for blood to clot. And if you look at my book, or my first book, which is a study of how we can profile people that are dangerous, I did a study of James Holmes, the Batman shooter, and a big piece of research on mass murderers, proving that you can determine whether a person would kill, and you can also predict really very clearly when they would do it. But there's a lot of information in there about the validity of astrology, if you want to look at that. And then look at my YouTube channel. I have a good documentary on there, short, it's about 30 minutes, a video presentation called The Truth. It's about astrology. And you'll enjoy it if you're interested in metaphysics, if you want to know the truth about how the world works. I'm concerned for Trump because Saturn, major malefic, bad guy, is transiting towards his moon at the south node. In my opinion, that potentially places his life at risk. And I know that it's common in the US to say, oh, the president-elect could be assassinated, or the president could be assassinated. It is a risk. And I pray that we don't have that problem. My belief is the American people have the right to choose their president, and they have. Just as the British had the right to choose whether or not they would stay in the European Union. They chose to leave, Brexit. I have not fully analysed the outlook for for Britain, but I'm not convinced that Britain will Brexit, and I'll explain that another time. But I'm concerned for Trump because of this approach of Saturn, the major malefic, a killing planet to his south node. Now, people don't all get assassinated when Saturn transits their south node, don't get me wrong, but it is a concern, it's a risk. And his security team need to keep him very, very safe, particularly when Saturn transits over that point. I've issued information relating to that in the hope that a problem could be avoided. Many other indicators. The day of the election, the moon transiting through Aquarius. Aquarius is the sign of Donald Trump's part of fortune. It was another favourable indicator for him. Uranus up in the sky, transiting, slow-moving planet, oddball. Uranus is quirky. Strange things happen where Uranus is concerned. It's the sudden oddball thing like the bolt of lightning. And Uranus is positioned by aspect to his nodes, the north node of the moon and the south node of the moon. They're very much associated with karma and the direction you take, your path, etc. Uranus is very favourably positioned. And Uranus is forming an unfavourable aspect to his natal Saturn, his opponent Clinton. And there's another technique I use. I use many different astrological techniques. One of them is called Fideria, and we break a person's life down into different periods. And then we break each period of about 10 years down into sub-periods. And we look at which planet rules the sub-period and what that shows us. In June of last year, just after his announcement to run for president, in June of this year, Trump moved into what's called the North Node Ferdar. That's a favourable time period. It was another indication to me that Trump would win the election. Let's take a look at Clinton. Again, I'm not going to bore you with tons and tons of detail. I will produce a longer video for people that really want massive detail astrologically. Clinton's got various indicators here that she would lose. And actually, I'll tell you what was very useful to me, because a lot of astrologers have written to me and said, how did you come to that conclusion that Clinton would lose and Trump would win? And I said, well, one of the things I did was I looked at members of their family. Chelsea Clinton's chart's looking very, very unfavourable. It's not looking like the chart of somebody that's excited that their mother's just become president of the United States. It looks like a chart of somebody that's really very, very disappointed and challenged by the circumstances. I looked at so many charts. The positioning of the sun transiting up in the sky there caused me to realise that she wouldn't win, because it's in an adverse aspect to her besiegement of Pluto. Also, transiting Venus up in the sky is in opposition to her natal Uranus. Now, transiting Venus is symbolic of Trump's career path. It was in opposition to her Uranus in her natal chart, showing that there would be some oddball situation. And there are many other factors in her chart. Let me point out a couple just out of interest to you. If you progress the planet Jupiter in Clinton's chart, you find that transiting Saturn there in Sagittarius, in the middle of Sagittarius, is on top of her progressed Jupiter, indicating that she would not be fortunate. I'm going to show you some other considerations. This chart is just Donald Trump's natal chart on the inside in blue and Hillary Clinton's natal chart on the outside. And there are a number of things that made me realise that Trump would win. One of them was the fact that Donald Trump's very powerful Mars and descendant form a 90-degree angle, a very adverse aspect to Hillary Clinton's Jupiter, her good fortune, showing that she would be defeated. And there are many other testimonies. We speak of testimonies, It's like looking at a really complex lawsuit. You've got to take all the different pieces of evidence and work through it to a conclusion. I'll show you a couple of things that are very interesting. This chart here is a combination of charts. On the middle, or in the middle, I should say, in the middle, you have the United States chart. Nations have charts. That's how I accurately predicted the last Israel-Palestine conflict, almost to the day. That's how I raised alarm signals about Syria and ISIS and France and Germany. That's how I raised alarm bells about Egypt. I was looking at the charts of nations. On the outside, in red, those planets are Donald Trump. There are some very interesting factors here. If you look to the bottom, Donald Trump's part of fortune in red, the little circle in red with the cross in it, is on top of the United States moon. The American people would choose Donald Trump. These are just natal charts, okay? I'm not looking at progressed charts. I'm just taking the natal
probabilities. And this is a very important point. If you want to predict something, you've got to understand what you're looking at, what you're dealing with, and what is possible for that entity or that person or that nation. If you don't have the chart of somebody that could win the presidency, you're not going to win the presidency. You can almost stop looking, don't even think about progressing it, looking at transits. Now, the other factor that really caught my attention is that Saturn, planet of government, of duty, in the American chart is in that sweet spot, that perfect point in Libra. And that's where Donald Trump's natal Jupiter sits. Donald Trump's Venus, ruler of his career, is right on top of the American part of fortune in the Sibley chart. There are different charts for the US because there's a debate about what time is the correct time for the US chart. So I use the Gemini rising chart and the Sibley chart. And people say to me, which one should you use? The answer is all of them. It's like house systems. People say, which house system should I use to understand what's going on in my life or this client's life? And I say, they'll all reveal something. They'll all tell part of the story. How much time have you got to look at it is the question. The natal Mercury in Cancer decisions in the US chart is right next to Donald Trump's Venus as well, showing that the American people would choose Trump. And again, there are tons of other testimonies. And I won't talk you through the other US charts, it's too much detail. Let's have a quick look at the US Sibley chart and Hillary Clinton's chart. Her moon, in red down there in the bottom of the chart, is in opposition to Neptune in the US chart. That's a very strong sign of disillusionment and disappointment and of deception, potentially. And there are many other indications in this chart. You could talk about this chart alone for hours. I looked at charts for the age of Aquarius. I looked at just the US chart itself. I looked at Donald Trump versus the age of Aquarius, Clinton versus the age of Aquarius. I looked at solar return charts. I looked at WikiLeaks. I almost said Wikipedia then. WikiLeaks. Many charts. I looked at Obama. It was a big job. I will release a presentation on what's called horary astrology, H-O-R-A-R-Y. And that's a form of astrology we use when we're just wanting the answer to a question. And the question was, will Trump win the election? It's a separate analysis, separate chart. And I asked that question. You run the chart for the very moment the astrologer is asking for the answer to the question. And if you know, horary astrology is complex, but if you know what you're doing, you get very clear answers. So I'm excited to do a presentation on the horary astrology because it was very clear from the horary chart that Trump would win the election. I like to say all information is if you know where to find it. I looked at lunar returns for the month for Trump, for the US, for Clinton. I looked at lunar returns and transits for the time of the inauguration. And they were very revealing because the Clinton family have very sort of disappointing and adverse charts at the time of the inauguration. That built my case, making me pretty clear that they were not going to be feeling great at the time of the inauguration, that it would be a sad time for them. So I will leave it there for now, and want to just remind you that there's a lot of information on my website, stephenframpton.com. It's Stephen with a V, and Frampton is Frampton for November. If you look at the blogs, there's a load of stuff there. And I'm on Pinterest and Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. I am going to be producing weekly or bi-weekly a news bulletin bringing insight, metaphysical insight, astrological insight, spiritual insight to world events. I have very significant concerns about the state of our world. I have very strong concerns about the global economy. And I really feel strongly that if you favoured Trump, or you favoured Clinton, or you favoured someone else, we must work together now. There is no time for us to be fighting with each other. We've got big problems to address, and that's what we need to be focused on. We need to come together, and that is not just in the US, it's all over the place. And I hope that we can do that. So there you go. I've given you probably, in honesty, only about not even 5% of the analysis, because it would take too long. But if you'd like to know more about astrology, look at my website, and if I can ever assist you, please contact me. If you would like to learn about really good astrology, then please visit my website. I love to teach. I love to research and learn more. It's a never-ending study. And I have quite a number of online classes that I'm reformatting, and I'll be putting all of that out there again shortly, so that people can really learn to use astrology and other tools. There's some very interesting tools in order to better understand themselves, better understand other people, better understand their relationships, better understand the world, better understand what's occurring, better understand what is most likely to occur in future at different points in time. Because the more understanding we have, the more we are empowered to change our destinies. I'll finish by saying that the planets will express themselves always, and that cannot be changed. But you can change what you choose. You can choose to be away from danger when there's danger. You can choose to be in the right place at the right time when there's opportunity. You can choose your perspective. So we have an enormous amount of free will. And I'm very interested in what we call manifestation, the law of attraction, how we create. I've studied that for years and years, and I've found that the vast majority of material out there is very incomplete, very sort of confusing and misleading, because it doesn't give you the understanding that you need. It's very real. The opportunities are huge. So I'm writing a book. I'm writing a number of books, but one of them is all about how you can truly better understand yourself, your world, your opportunities, and how the universe functions, so that you truly can create far more of what you really, really want. And it's going to be very practical. It'll be very interesting, but it will be very, very practical. It will tell you specific things you can do so that you can change your life. And on that note, I will clear my throat with a swig of wine, and I wish you the best, and I want to thank you for being open-minded enough and smart enough to listen to this information, which is not mine or about me. It's about what God placed here for us, the planets and everything else, and about the opportunity we each have to get to the truth. And as I said, my view to date in life is that everything is predictable. Thank you.